The needle slid through the silk like a softly spoken secret. Every stitch was a prayer I had been crafting for just over 5 months. French seams, hand-rolled hems, seed pearls sewn on one by one until my fingers split and my eyes stung beneath the amber lamplight. The dress lay spread across my dining table like moonlight caught and held. Soft ivory silk charmeuse that had cost me nearly 4 weeks of grocery money. But every sacrifice felt justified for Lena's wedding day. At 60, my hands were no longer as steady as they'd been when I sewed my own wedding dress 38 years earlier, but they were wiser. Each pleat carried decades of muscle memory. Every dart was shaped by the ghosts of countless alterations I'd done to scrape by after John died. This dress wasn't merely fabric and thread. It was my love letter to my only daughter, the child I raised alone after her father's sudden heart attack when she was barely 14. The pale winter sun cast long rectangles across my kitchen floor as I wrapped the gown in acid-free tissue paper, just as my mother had taught me to protect precious things. My reflection in the hallway mirror showed a woman grown thinner from worry and lean from years of stretching every dollar. Yet my eyes held the quiet satisfaction of a job done well. Today, Lena would see what her mother's hands had created in the silence of endless nights. I paused before zipping the garment bag closed, smoothing the silk one last time. I could still remember Lena at 9, sitting cross-legged on this same linoleum floor, watching me mend a hem for one of her school dresses. She'd asked why I never used a machine for the hard parts. Because hands remember love, I'd told her then. Machines don't. The drive downtown was slower than usual, traffic thick with delivery vans and early commuters. The Ridgeway Grand rose before me like a wedding cake built of brick, steel, and reflective glass. Its valet parking alone cost more than I spent on groceries in 10 days. Lena had chosen this venue, or rather her future mother-in-law had chosen it. Even knowing my modest teacher's pension couldn't stretch to such extravagance, I had offered to help with the flowers instead, to contribute in a way I could manage. But Camille Rhodes had smiled that thin, courteous smile and said, "Oh, don't worry about contributing, May. Everything important is already covered." The bridal suite buzzed with expensive chaos. Camille directed a team of professionals like a general arranging troops, a makeup artist with a wheeled case full of glass bottles and brushes, a hairstylist whose scissors moved with surgical precision, and a photographer whose camera clicked non-stop, capturing every carefully staged, candid moment. Lena sat at the center of it all like a porcelain doll, beautiful and motionless, while strangers painted, prodded, and fussed over her. My daughter had always been beautiful, but today she looked like someone else entirely. Someone polished to a shine that reflected only what others wanted to see. "Mum." Lena's voice carried that familiar tone that meant she needed something, but was already bracing for disappointment. "You're here. Good. We're almost ready for the dress." I lifted the garment bag with the reverence reserved for sacred objects. 5 months of evenings after grading papers. 5 months of saving every spare dollar. 5 months of dreaming about the moment my daughter would slip into silk and lace made by her mother's hands. "I brought it," I said, my voice gentler than I meant it to be. Camille looked up from her clipboard, her gaze settling on my garment bag like a judge assessing evidence. "Oh, the dress you made," she said lightly. "How thoughtful." The word thoughtful fell from her lips like a polite apology for something inconvenient. I began undipping the bag, my fingers shaking slightly, not from nerves but from the sheer intensity of love stitched into every seam. The silk emerged like water taking form, and for a brief moment the room fell quiet. It began, then stalled. "It's very handmade," Camille finished, stepping closer with the air of someone inspecting damaged goods. "The detailing is quite rustic." Rustic. 5 months of French seams and hand-embroidered pearls dismissed with a single word. I felt something shift inside my chest. a small door quietly closing. "Lena, darling," Camille continued, her voice smooth with practiced kindness. "Perhaps we should consider the backup option we discussed. The boutique gown. It's more suitable for the space and lighting." Lena's eyes flicked between the dress I'd made and the woman who would soon be her mother-in-law. I watched my daughter calculate her choice like a merchant weighing profit and loss, and I saw the exact moment she chose the path that led away from me. "Mum, I think maybe we should go with the other one," she said. "This is—" She hesitated, searching for words that wouldn't wound too deeply. "It's just not quite right for the room." The pain arrived sharp and precise, threading through 24 years of scraped knees I'd bandaged, fevers I'd sat up through, and dreams I'd encouraged. I folded the dress back into its tissue paper cocoon, my movements slow and careful, the way I'd learned to handle disappointment while keeping my dignity intact. "Of course," I said, "whatever makes you happy." I stepped into the hallway to give them privacy, but also to breathe. The corridor's patterned carpet dulled the sounds of wedding preparation, though voices still carried through the door I hadn't fully closed. "I'm relieved," Camille's voice floated out. "Can you imagine explaining that to guests?" Lena laughed, a light, nervous sound that struck straight through me. "If anyone asks, I'll just say it didn't fit. It kind of looks like something you'd find second-hand." The words landed with a quiet brutality. 5 months. 5 months of my life. My love. Reduced to something that needed explaining away. I stood there with the garment bag pressed to my chest and felt something fundamental change inside me. Not break, because breaking implied repair. This felt more like shedding, like leaving behind a skin that no longer fit. When I walked back into the room, the boutique gown was already halfway zipped. Lena's face looked relieved. Camille's looked satisfied. "I'm going to take this home," I said calmly. "Oh, Mom," Lena said quickly. "Maybe I could wear it to the rehearsal dinner?" "No," I said. "That won't be necessary." I kissed her forehead, breathing in the scent of expensive hairspray and unfamiliar perfume. "Have a beautiful wedding, sweetheart." As I walked down the hallway, I heard Camille say, "That was simpler than I expected. Sometimes people just need to be realistic." The elevator doors closed. In my arms, wrapped in tissue paper and bruised pride, rested the beginning of something entirely different. The bridal suite felt smaller once the dress was zipped back into its bag. The mirrors reflected too much. Too many faces, too many opinions, until I wasn't sure where my daughter ended and everyone else began. I stood near the window with the garment bag resting against my leg, watching condensation slide down the glass in thin, nervous lines. Camille clapped her hands once, sharp and decisive. "All right, let's reset. We'll bring in the other gown." A stylist disappeared through the adjoining room and returned moments later with the boutique dress, still wrapped in crisp white plastic. Even before it was unveiled, it carried a kind of authority. It was heavier than mine, weighed down with structure and imported beadwork that glittered aggressively under the lights. Lena watched it approach with an expression I couldn't quite name. Relief, maybe. Or surrender. "Just breathe, sweetheart," Camille said, smoothing Lena's shoulder. "This is the one that works." Works. The word landed quietly, but it echoed, as if a wedding dress were an appliance instead of a vessel for love. The photographer, Evan, I thought his name was, hovered uncertainly near the door. His camera hung idle against his chest, lens cap still on. He kept glancing at me, then at the dress bag by my feet, as if unsure whether he was witnessing something private that should not be documented. "Do you want me to get some detail shots before we switch?" he asked carefully. Camille didn't look at him. "There's no need." Lena didn't look at me either. The stylists moved efficiently, undipping, lifting, stepping around Lena's body as if it belonged to the process more than to her. I had measured that body myself not long ago, knew the slope of her shoulders, the way she favored one hip when standing too long. I'd built my dress to accommodate those details. The boutique gown asked her to disappear into it instead. When the plastic finally came away, the room reacted the way Camille had expected. Small gasp. A murmured, "Oh wow." Someone said, "That's stunning," and meant expensive. Lena smiled then, tentative at first, then wider as the reactions continued. I watched her posture change, her shoulders pulling back as the weight of approval settled over her. "It looks right," Camille said. "It photographs beautifully." Evan lifted his camera at last, hesitating just long enough that I noticed. Then the shutter began to click. I shifted the garment bag in my hand. The pearls inside my dress made the faintest sound, a soft settling like breath. No one heard it but me. "Mum?" Lena said suddenly, turning toward me. Her smile wavered. "You're okay, right?" The question felt less like concern and more like a request. Permission to proceed without guilt. "I'm fine," I said. And it was true in the narrowest sense of the word. I was standing, I was breathing, I was not making a scene. Camille stepped between us, adjusting the fall of the boutique gown with proprietary confidence. "May understands, she wants what's best for you." What's best? Another phrase that assumed so much it didn't bother asking. Lena nodded quickly, latching onto the idea. "Of course. You do, right?" I thought of the hours spent hunched over silk while the rest of the house slept, of the nights I'd redone entire seams because they weren't perfect enough for her, of the way I'd imagined that exact moment, her stepping into the dress while I fastened each button with shaking hands. "Yes," I said. "I want what makes you happy." Camille smiled, satisfied. The matter was closed. The rest of the room resumed its motion as if nothing delicate had just been crushed underfoot. Someone handed Lena a glass of water. Another stylist dabbed at her lip. Evan circled, capturing angles and smiles, the camera clicking faster now that he'd been given permission to see. I took a step back, then another, until my shoulder brushed the doorframe. No one noticed. In the hallway, the air was cooler. The carpet smelled faintly of industrial cleaner and old perfume. I leaned my forehead briefly against the wall, careful not to wrinkle my jacket, and let the quiet wrap around me. Through the partially open door, Camille's voice carried clearly. "You handled that well," she said. "It's not easy to make practical decisions when emotions get involved." "I know," Lena replied. Her voice sounded younger out here, less polished. "I just didn't want it to be awkward." "Exactly. People talk. You don't want the dress to become the story." A pause. "If anyone asks," Lena added, a nervous laugh threading through her words, "I'll just say it didn't fit. It kind of looked second-hand." I closed my eyes. The phrase didn't sting so much as it hollowed. Second-hand implied not just old, but unwanted, passed over, left behind. Inside the suite, laughter rose again, relieved and bright, a crisis averted, a choice made. I straightened, smoothing the front of my coat. The garment bag felt heavier now, though nothing about it had changed. I lifted it properly, the way I taught Lena to lift her school bag when she was little, and stepped back into the room. Camille glanced up, momentarily surprised. "Oh? Still here?" "I'm going to take this home," I said, my voice steady. Lena turned, her eyes widening. "Already?" "Yes." "Well, maybe don't," Camille said lightly. "We might need it as a backup." I met her gaze. "You won't." Lena stepped forward. "Mom, maybe I could wear it to the rehearsal dinner? Or something smaller?" I shook my head once. No. The words settled between us, simple and final. I leaned in and kissed Lena's cheek. Her skin was warm, powdered, unfamiliar. "Have a beautiful wedding," I said. Camille was already turning away, issuing instructions. "Okay, Evan, let's get the veil shots." As I left, I heard her murmur, almost pleasantly, "That went smoother than I expected. Sometimes people just need to accept reality." The elevator doors closed with a muted chime. I watched my reflection blur in the mirrored walls as we descended, the garment bag cradled in my arms like something newly born. By the time I stepped out into the lobby, the air smelled of polished stone and expensive flowers. Somewhere upstairs, my daughter was becoming someone else's wife in a dress chosen for how well it worked. I pushed through the revolving doors and into the cold, carrying with me a dress that had not failed, only been refused. The drive home blurred at the edges, traffic lights smearing into bands of red and amber as my mind replayed the same moments again and again. I kept both hands on the steering wheel, the garment bag buckled into the passenger seat like a living thing that needed protecting. The radio murmured softly. An afternoon talk show I wasn't listening to, but I didn't turn it off. Silence felt too loud. At a red light, I caught my reflection in the rearview mirror. My lipstick had faded. A loose strand of hair had slipped free near my temple. I looked older than I had that morning, as if the day had aged me in real time. I drove past the school where I had taught for 36 years. The brick building crouched low and familiar behind bare maples. Past the grocery store where I knew which aisle was cheapest for tea. Past the park where Lena had learned to ride a bike, wobbling and furious, insisting she didn't need my hand on the seat even when she clearly did. By the time I pulled into my driveway, the light had shifted toward evening. The house greeted me with its familiar creaks and stillness. I set the garment bag on the back of a chair and stood in the kitchen, unsure what to do with my hands. I filled the kettle, watching water climb the glass sides, then set it on the burner. The routine steadied me. Measure, heat, wait. When the kettle whistled, I poured the water over a tea bag I'd used too many times already and carried the mug into the dining room. I laid the dress out across the table again, undipping the bag slowly, deliberately. The silk caught the lamplight just as it had before, luminous and patient. Nothing about it had changed. I ran my fingers along the bodice, following the spiral of pearls I'd sewn while grading essays late into the night. I remembered thinking, as I worked, that no one would ever see the seams on the inside, the hours of care hidden beneath the surface. But I would know they were there. That had been enough. The phone rang once, sharp and sudden, breaking the quiet. I watched it vibrate on the counter without moving. I knew who it was. The call went to voicemail. A moment later, the silence returned, heavier than before. I sat down at the table and lifted my tea, then set it back untouched. Somewhere across the city, Lena was walking down an aisle, smiling for cameras, said vows in a dress chosen because it worked. Camille would be watching, satisfied, guests would murmur appreciatively, and my dress would be here. 3 days passed that way, quiet, contained, almost reverent. I moved through the house as if it were a museum, careful not to disturb anything. I slept late. I ate toast standing at the counter. I avoided the mirror. On the 4th morning, I woke early with a sense of restlessness I couldn't name. I made coffee instead of tea, stronger than usual, and carried it into the dining room. The dress was still there, exactly where I'd left it. For the first time since bringing it home, I didn't see it as a rejection. I saw it as evidence. I fetched my phone and began taking photographs, close-ups of the beadwork, the inside seams, the fall of the skirt when lifted just so. I photographed the dress the way I used to photograph Lena's science projects, careful, proud, documenting proof of effort. As I worked, my mother's voice surfaced from memory, unbidden. "May, you have the hands of an artist. Don't waste them fixing what other people refuse to value." I had wasted them, I realized, or at least hidden them. Teaching had been honest work, necessary work, but it had also been safe. Sewing had stayed tucked into evenings and weekends, something I did quietly, gratefully, without expecting recognition. The phone buzzed with a text. "Mum, I'm sorry. I didn't mean it like that." I stared at the message until the screen dimmed. I didn't reply. There was a knock at the door just after noon. I hesitated, then opened it to find a young woman on my porch, her dark hair pulled into a messy knot, a glass baking dish balanced in her arms. She looked determined and slightly out of breath. "Hi," she said. "I'm Nia. I live above the bakery on Maple." I blinked. "Yes?" She held up the dish. "I brought food. My aunt always says casseroles are for when people don't know what to say." I studied her face, searching my memory. "Do I know you?" "Not really," she said. "But Lena does. Or did. We worked together years ago." She shifted her weight. "She called me a few nights ago." Understanding settled slowly. "She told me what happened." Mia continued. "What she said about the dress." Her jaw tightened. "I thought someone should check on you." I stepped aside. "Come in." Nia entered and stopped short, her gaze locking on the dining table. "Oh," she breathed. "That's it, isn't it?" "Yes." She moved closer, reverent, her fingers hovering but not touching. "May, this is extraordinary. The construction alone." She broke off, shaking her head. "I did a year of fashion school before life interfered. I know what I'm looking at." Something in my chest loosened. We sat at the kitchen table with coffee growing cold between us. Nia asked questions, specific ones, about technique, about time, about choices. She listened when I answered. "You know," she said finally, "my cousin Ruth is getting married in a few months. She's been panicking about her dress. Budget, expectations, all of it." I looked toward the dining room. "I'm not sure. She'd cry to wear something like that," Nia said, "not because it's expensive, because it was made with care." The idea settled gently, like a hand on my shoulder. That afternoon, Ruth came over. She stood very still when she saw the dress, then covered her mouth with both hands. "You made that?" she asked. "I did." She tried it on in my bedroom, emerging transformed. The dress fit her as if it had been waiting. "I look like a bride," she whispered. "Yes," I said. "You do." Nia took a photograph. Later that evening, after they left, my phone buzzed again, this time with notifications I didn't understand yet. Messages, comments, questions. The dress had begun a second life, and for the first time since the wedding, I slept without dreaming. The morning after Ruth tried on the dress, I woke with the odd sensation of having missed something important. Sunlight crept through the blinds in thin, cautious lines, touching the edge of the dining table where the silk still lay folded. For a moment, I couldn't remember why it was there, only that it mattered. I made toast and burned it. I made more toast and forgot it on the counter. My phone lay face down beside my plate, vibrating intermittently with notifications I didn't yet have the courage to read. When I finally picked it up, the screen lit with unfamiliar names. Messages from people I didn't know. A missed call from an unknown number. Another text from Lena, longer the time, full of explanations and soft apologies and references to stress. I read it once, then set the phone down again without answering. Instead, I went back to the dress. I lifted it carefully, rehanging it from the garment rack I'd used when fitting Lena. On Ruth, it had looked different. Lighter somehow, freer. I adjusted the straps slightly, pinning where her shoulders sat higher, noting how little it would take to make it truly hers. The realization startled me. I had built this dress to fit one woman, and yet it wanted to become something else. I opened the notebook I'd used for lesson plans for decades and turned to a blank page. Without quite knowing why, I began sketching. Not Ruth's dress exactly, but variations. necklines, sleeves, ways to alter structure without losing integrity. The pencil moved easily, as if my hand had been waiting for permission. By late morning, the phone rang again. "May Barnes?" a woman's voice asked, brisk but warm. "Yes, this is Claire from Northwest Living. Someone forwarded me a photograph of a wedding dress you made. I was wondering if you'd be willing to talk about it." I sank into the nearest chair. "I'm not sure you have the right person." "Oh, I'm quite sure," she said lightly. "The craftsmanship is unmistakable." We spoke for 10 minutes, then 20. When I hung up, my coffee had gone cold again. That afternoon, Nia returned, carrying her laptop and an energy that filled the room. "Okay," she said, setting it down. "People are asking questions, real questions." She showed me the photo she'd posted of Ruth in the dress. It had been shared dozens of times overnight, comments stacked beneath it, admiration, curiosity, requests. Who made this? Is she taking commissions? This doesn't look mass-produced. My chest tightened, not with fear this time, but something sharper, recognition. "I don't know how to answer them," I said. Nia grinned. "That's because you don't think of yourself as what you are." "And what is that?" "A professional." The word felt too large, too presumptuous. "I was a teacher," I said. "You were many things," she replied, "and you still are, but this..." She gestured toward the rack, the sketches, the dress. "This is a skill people will pay for." I hesitated. "I don't know anything about running a business." "Neither did I when I started taking alterations on the side," she said. "We learn." We talked numbers, tentatively at first, time, materials, what my hours were worth. Saying the amounts aloud made me flinch. They sounded extravagant, even though Nia insisted they were conservative. "You can always say no," she reminded me, "but you can't pretend people aren't asking." That evening, I finally listened to Lena's voicemail. Her voice was tired, tight with guilt. "I didn't mean to hurt you," she said. "Camille was just trying to help." I panicked. "Please call me." I sat very still while the message ended. For years, I had taught children how to write persuasive essays. Claim, evidence, conclusion. Lena had offered explanation, not a counterbalance. The next day, I drove to the fabric district for the first time in years. The familiar smell of starch and dye wrapped around me like a memory. I ran my hands over bolts of silk, wool, linen. The clerk watched me with interest, then recognition. "You're the dress lady," she said. I laughed, startled. "I am?" She nodded. "My cousin shared that photo." On the drive home, the city felt subtly altered, as if I were seeing it not as a retiree filling time, but as someone with purpose. That night, I wrote a list: what I knew, what I needed, what I was willing to risk. At the bottom of the page, I wrote one sentence and underlined it twice. I am allowed to want more than gratitude. The dress waited quietly nearby, patient as ever. For the first time, I understood that it wasn't waiting to be chosen, it was waiting to choose. Ruth came back the following afternoon with her shoes in a paper bag and her hair still damp from a rushed shower. She looked nervous in the doorway, as if afraid I might change my mind. "I brought the heels," she said, "and I baked bread." The loaf was warm through the towel she'd wrapped it in. The smell filled the kitchen, grounding and ordinary, the opposite of the sharp hotel air I still carried in my memory. "That wasn't necessary," I said. "I know," she replied, "but I wanted to." We set the shoes on the dining table and unzipped the garment bag together. Ruth's hands shook slightly as she reached for the silk, then steadied when she felt its weight. "I keep thinking someone's going to tell me this is a mistake," she said quietly, "that it's too much, or not enough." "No one gets to decide that but you," I told her. She nodded, absorbing the words as if they were new. In the bedroom, I helped her step into the dress again. It settled over her shoulders with a familiarity that surprised her both. I adjusted the back, pinned where I'd marked the day before, and had her walk a few steps. It moves differently, she said. Yes, I agreed, because you do. She smiled at herself in the mirror, tentative but growing. I've never had anything made for me before. I didn't say what came to mind, that neither had Lena, really, not in the way that mattered. Instead, I focused on the work. We spent the afternoon making small decisions, a half-inch here, a softer curve there. Ruth asked questions, not because she doubted me, but because she wanted to understand. What made you choose pearls, she asked, watching as I marked the neckline. They catch light without demanding it, I said, like confidence. She laughed. I could use some of that. You already have it, I said. This just gives it somewhere to rest. When Nia arrived later with her camera, Ruth didn't flinch this time. She stood where I told her, turned when I asked, trusted the process. Afterward, we sat on the floor with coffee and bread torn by hand. Ruth talked about her job at the shelter, about the wedding they were planning in her aunt's backyard, about how she kept apologizing to vendors for not having a bigger budget. You don't need to apologize for the size of your life, I said, surprised by my own certainty. She went quiet at that. That night, after they left, I received 3 emails asking about commissions. One included measurements, another included a wedding date circled in red. I didn't answer any of them. Instead, I opened a new document and wrote a single paragraph describing what I would and would not do, how long I would take, what I would charge, what I refused to compromise. It felt like drawing a boundary with myself. The next morning, I sent it to Nia. Is this reasonable? I asked. She replied within minutes. It's honest. That's better. By the end of the week, I had said yes to 2 commissions and no to 4. Each no left me strangely relieved. On Saturday, Lena called again. I heard you're making another dress, she said, skipping preamble. Yes, for someone else. Yes. A pause. You didn't tell me. I didn't think it was necessary. She exhaled sharply. People are talking, Mom, so I've noticed. I don't want this to get out of hand. I looked at Ruth's pinned hem, at the careful chalk lines that marked a future already taking shape. It already has, I said, in a good way. You sound different, Ian. Another pause, longer this time. Camille thinks you're doing this out of spite. I smiled, though she couldn't see it. Then Camille doesn't know me at all. After we hung up, I didn't feel shaken, I felt clarified. The following week, Ruth brought her mother, then her sister. They hovered near the doorway, watching me work with something like awe. You really made this? Her mother asked. Yes. With your hands? I flexed my fingers. These old things? Yes. She reached out and squeezed my arm. Thank you for seeing my daughter. The words stayed with me long after they left. That evening, I pinned a small sign to the corkboard above my desk. I'd written it in block letters with a marker I'd found in a drawer. This work deserves time. Below it, I added another line. So do I. Outside, the sky dimmed early, the season turning without asking permission. Inside, the dress took shape under my hands, not as a replacement for what had been rejected, but as proof that rejection was not the end of the story. It was only the edit. The attention arrived the way weather does, first as a change in pressure, then as something unavoidable. It wasn't dramatic at first. A few more emails. A message request from someone who had found Nia's post through a friend of a friend. A voicemail left after dinner by a woman who spoke quickly, breathless with hope, asking if I might consider making a dress for her daughter's courthouse ceremony. I listened to the message twice before deleting it. Not because I wasn't interested, but because I needed to decide how interested I was allowed to be. Nia came over that afternoon with a legal pad and a pen. We need a system, she said, settling at the table as if this had always been her place. Otherwise, you're going to say yes to everyone and burn yourself out. I don't burn out, I said automatically. She raised an eyebrow. You taught middle school for 3 decades. You invented burnout. I laughed despite myself. We sketched out a loose intake process, questions I would ask, timelines I would insist on, prices that reflected not just materials but the hours of attention I refused to discount anymore. Writing it down made it real. It also made it frightening. You know this is a business now, Nia said gently, not a favor. I nodded. I'm trying to get used to that. The phone rang midway through our discussion. An unfamiliar number. I hesitated, then answered. May Barnes? A woman asked. This is Diane Keller. I'm a stylist with Channel 8. My stomach tightened. I'm not sure. I saw the photograph of the wedding dress you made, she continued. We're putting together a short segment on local artisans for our weekend feature. Would you be open to an interview? I glanced at Nia, who had gone very still. I'd have to think about it. Of course, Diane said, but we're filming Friday. After I hung up, the room felt charged, as if something had been plugged in. This is happening fast, I said. Nia grinned. It usually does. That evening, I called Lena back for the first time since the wedding. Not because I felt obligated, but because I wanted to hear how my voice sounded when I spoke without shrinking. She answered on the second ring. Mum? Yes. I didn't think you'd call. I didn't think you'd notice if I didn't. She was quiet. I heard you might be doing an interview. It's a possibility. With the news? Yes. Another pause. Camille thinks that kind of exposure can be risky. I'm sure she does. You have to be careful, Lena said. People can misinterpret things. I pictured Ruth in the dress, her hands shaking until they didn't. People already have, I said. I can't control that. What if they bring up the wedding? They might, and you'd be okay with that? I considered the question. I'd be honest. Her breath caught. Mum, I'm not trying to embarrass you, I said, Lena, but I won't lie to protect someone else's comfort anymore. She didn't respond right away. When she did, her voice sounded careful. I just don't want this to turn into a story about us. It already is, I said, whether we like it or not. After we hung up, I stood for a long moment in the quiet kitchen. The dress form waited in the corner, Ruth's gown draped over it like a promise mid-kept. Friday came sooner than I expected. I cleaned the house with unnecessary thoroughness, then changed my blouse twice before the producer arrived with a cameraman and a clipboard. Just be yourself, the producer said, setting up lights in my dining room. Talk about the work? I did. I talked about seams no one sees, about patience, about why certain fabrics forgive mistakes and others don't. I talked about learning to listen to bodies instead of fighting them. When the producer asked how I'd started sewing, I answered simply, out of necessity, then out of love. She nodded. And the dress that went viral? I felt the familiar tightening in my chest, but it didn't stop me. It was made for my daughter, I said. She chose not to wear it. The cameraman didn't flinch. The producer didn't interrupt. And that led you here? She asked. Yes. That night, after they left, I sat alone with the quiet hum of the refrigerator and the knowledge that something irreversible had been set in motion. On Sunday, the segment aired. Nia called before the credits finished rolling. You're already trending locally, she said. People love you. I didn't feel loved. I felt seen. By Monday morning, I had 12 new inquiries. By Tuesday, 17. By Wednesday, I stopped counting. In the middle of it all, Ruth came for her final fitting. She hugged me tightly before stepping into the dress. I've never felt that calm about anything, she said. I pinned the last hem and stepped back. That's how you know it's right. When she left, the room felt suddenly empty. I sat at the table and opened my notebook. On a new page, I wrote another sentence. If this is going to grow, it has to grow on my terms. Outside, the afternoon light shifted, indifferent to my resolve. Inside, I understood that control was no longer something I could borrow from other people. It was something I had to claim. The messages multiplied overnight. Some were thoughtful, measured, written by women who apologized for asking and then asked anyway. Others were breathless, full of exclamation points and urgency, as if beauty were a limited resource that might run out if they didn't claim it fast enough. I read them all, even the ones I couldn't answer. I learned quickly which questions mattered. How long does it take? Do you work with bodies like mine? Will you tell me if something doesn't suit me? Those I answered carefully. Others, requests for discounts, demands for rush jobs, assumptions that my time was flexible because I was retired, I declined. Nia sat across from me one afternoon, scrolling through a spreadsheet she'd built from scratch. "You know you're allowed to say no without explaining," she said. "I know," I replied. "I just never practiced." The segment replayed throughout the week. Each time the phone rang again. A florist called, then a photographer, then a woman who ran a small bridal shop on the east side and wanted to know if I'd consider a limited collaboration. "It would give you exposure," she said brightly. "I have exposure," I replied, surprising myself. On Thursday, Lena called from a number I didn't recognize. I answered without checking. "Mom," she said, sounding relieved. "I've been trying to reach you." "I know." I saw the segment again. "Camille thinks you should issue a clarification." "A clarification about what?" "About the wedding dress. About why you made it sound like I rejected you." I leaned against the counter, watching steam rise from the kettle. "Because you did. That's not fair," she said quickly. "I was under pressure. You know how she can be." "Yes," I said. "I do. So why are you letting people see I'm heartless?" "I'm not letting anyone think anything," I said. I answered a question. Silence stretched between us, thin and tense. "You could have protected me," Lena said at last. "I protected you for years," I replied. "This time, I protected myself." She exhaled sharply. "Mark says—" "I'm not interested in what Mark says," I interrupted, surprised by the calm in my voice. Her breath hitched. "You're changing." "Yes. And you don't care how it looks. I care how it feels." After we hung up, my hands shook slightly. I set the kettle aside and sat down until they steadied. Growth, it turned out, wasn't painless. It simply hurt in different places. That weekend, Ruth got married. The backyard glowed with string lights and borrowed chairs. The grass was uneven. The food came from 3 different kitchens. When Ruth stepped out wearing the dress, conversation stopped. She didn't float, she didn't pose. She laughed, freely and loudly, and hugged everyone within reach. I stood near the fence with Nia, watching. "You did that," Nia said. "No," I replied. "She did." The photographer, Ruth's friend from college, caught her mid-spin. The skirt lifting just enough to show movement, not spectacle. The dress didn't dominate the moment. It belonged to it. By Monday morning, the photograph was everywhere. This time, it wasn't just local. A fashion blogger shared it with a caption about quiet craftsmanship. A writer tagged it with a thread about women starting over later in life. A stranger messaged to say her mother had sewn dresses too, once, and had stopped when no one noticed. I noticed. A producer from a streaming platform called that afternoon. Not to interview me, she said, but to talk about a longer piece, a profile, a story. "I don't know if I'm ready for that," I told her. "You don't have to decide now," she said, "but stories like yours don't come along often." After I hung up, I walked into the dining room and looked at the empty garment rack. Ruth's dress was gone now, living its life elsewhere. In its place hung 2 new pieces, unfinished, waiting. That evening, I received an email from Camille. It was polite, controlled, carefully worded. She congratulated me on my recent attention and suggested that perhaps we should meet to align narratives before things became misunderstood. I read it twice. Then I archived it. Later, as I locked up for the night, I caught my reflection in the darkened window. I looked tired. I also looked steady. Visibility, I was learning, wasn't the same as power, but it was close enough to be dangerous. The request arrived as an invitation, which was how I knew it was a demand. Lena's email was brief and carefully worded. She suggested lunch at a cafe near her office. Neutral territory, she said. No spouses, no outside influences, just the 2 of her, like old times. I read it twice, then once more out loud. The phrasing was familiar, softened edges wrapped around a fixed outcome. I didn't answer right away. That afternoon, Nia watched me fold fabric with unnecessary precision. "You're thinking too hard," she said. "I'm deciding," I replied. "I know," she said gently. "Just don't confuse the 2. I agreed to lunch the next day. The cafe smelled like citrus cleaner and espresso. Lena was already there when I arrived, seated with her phone face down on the table. She stood quickly where she saw me, her smile practiced and brittle. "Mum," she said, leaning in for a quick hug that didn't quite land. "You look busy." "I am," I said, taking the chair across from her. We ordered. She chose a salad she wouldn't finish. I ordered soup and ate all of it. "I wanted to talk before things got any bigger," Lena began. "There's a lot of attention right now." "Yes. And people are starting to make assumptions." "About what?" "About our family," she said. "About me." I waited. She exhaled. "I think it would help if you clarified a few things publicly. Just context." "What kind of context?" "That you made the dress as a gift, not as a professional commission. That it wasn't meant to be," she searched for the word, "representative." I set my spoon down carefully. "Representative of what?" "Of your business," she said. "Of what you do now." "And why would I say that?" "Because it would explain why I didn't wear it," she said, relief flickering across her face as if she'd finally found the argument that would land. I studied her. The woman she had become, the way she spoke about explanation as if it were the same thing as truth. "No," I said. She blinked. "No?" "No," I repeated. "I won't do that." "But Mom, I made that dress with the same care I bring to every piece," I said. Saying otherwise would be a lie. "You don't have to lie," she insisted. "Just reframe." I smiled then, small and sad. "That's still a lie." Her jaw tightened. "You're being inflexible." "I'm being accurate." She leaned back, crossing her arms. "Do you know what people have said about me?" "I know what you said about the dress," I replied. "Those words are doing the work now." Her eyes flashed. "You're enjoying this?" I shook my head. "I'm surviving it." The server arrived with the check, interrupting the moment. Lena reached for it automatically, then hesitated. "I can get this," I said. She let me. Outside, the air was sharp with early autumn. We stood on the sidewalk, neither of us ready to leave. "I didn't think it would be like this," Lena said quietly. "Neither did I replied. She looked at me then, really looked, as if searching for the version of me she remembered. "You used to need me." I met her gaze. "I still love you." "That's not what I said, I know." She nodded once, stiffly. "Camille wants to meet you." "I'm sure she does." She thinks if you hear her out, things could be smoothed over. I'm not interested in smoothing, I said, only in being clear. Lena's shoulders sagged. For a moment, she looked younger. I don't know how to do that, she admitted. Neither do I said, but pretending won't help. We parted without another hug. That evening, a producer called to confirm interest in the longer piece. I told her I needed time. After I hung up, I stood alone in the studio, surrounded by half-finished work. 2 dresses on forms, 1 jacket waiting for buttons. The space smelled faintly of steam and fabric dust. I understood then that visibility had shifted something fundamental. I was no longer just reacting to other people's expectations, they were reacting to mine. The paperwork took longer than I expected. Forms multiplied the way doubts used to, each one demanding clarity where I had once relied on instinct. Business license, tax ID, insurance. I filled them out at the dining table with a pen that kept skipping, my handwriting growing firmer as the hours passed. Nia handled the things I didn't want to learn too quickly. Spreadsheets, calendars, a separate bank account that made everything feel suddenly serious. This is the part where people panic, she said cheerfully. You're doing great. I wasn't sure I agreed, but I kept going. We looked at spaces, first a narrow storefront that smelled like damp cardboard and regret. Then a bright corner unit with tall windows and scuffed floors that caught the afternoon light just right. I stood in the middle of it and imagined fabric bolts along the walls. A fitting area tucked behind a curtain. A long table scarred by honest work. I can see it, Nia said. So can I replied. Signing the lease felt heavier than any dress I'd ever made. I pressed the pen down hard, as if the paper might resist me. When it was done, Nia whooped and hugged me, laughing into my shoulder. We should name it, she said. The word had been hovering for days, just out of reach. Threadwork, I said finally, because every piece carries a history. She nodded. Perfect. The first official commission came from a woman named Celia who wanted a suit for her 50th birthday. Not a dress, or an apology. A suit that made room for her shoulders and her authority. Working on it felt different. Purposeful. I took my tie without guilt. The phone rang mid-stitch. Lena's name lit the screen. I answered. I heard you signed a lease, she said without greeting. Yes. You really doing this? Yes. She exhaled. Mark thinks it's risky. I know. Camille thinks it's unnecessary. I know. And you don't care. I set my needle down. I care very much, just not about that. Silence. I don't recognize you, Lena said finally. I closed my eyes. You never tried to. She hung up without saying goodbye. That night, Nia and I sat on the studio floor eating takeout from cartons, surrounded by boxes of thread and unopened supplies. You okay? She asked. I'm grieving, I said. Just not what she thinks. Opening day was quiet, no ribbon, no crowd, just light through the windows and the hum of the iron heating up. A woman wandered in by accident and left with an appointment. By evening, the space felt lived in. I locked the door and stood for a moment in the dark, hand on the glass, feeling the weight of everything I had chosen. It was heavy. It was mine. The article came out on a Tuesday morning, quietly, without warning. Nia sent me the link with a single line, "You might want to sit down." I read it standing at the cutting table, scissors still in my hand. The headline was clever without being cruel. The photographs were respectful. The writer had done her homework. She talked about threadwork as if it had always been inevitable, as if I hadn't spent decades convincing myself otherwise. Halfway through, I found the paragraph, the dress, the wedding, the rejection. She didn't name Lena, she didn't quote Camille, she didn't sensationalize, She simply stated facts and let them rest where they landed. By noon, my phone wouldn't stop buzzing. Some messages were kind, others were furious on my behalf. A few asked questions I refused to answer. Did your daughter apologize? Do you talk now? Does she regret it? I ignored them all. The first real consequence arrived that evening. Lena called, her voice tight and shaking. I can't go to work tomorrow. I closed the shop early and sat on the floor behind the counter. Why? People know, she said. They don't say anything outright, but they look at me differently, like they've decided something. They have, I said gently. You let this happen? No, I replied. You did. Her breath hitched. I didn't think. I know. Silence. I need you to fix this, she said finally. I leaned back against the wall. I can't. You're my mother. Yes, I said. And I'm also a person. She cried then, not loudly, not dramatically. Just enough to remind me of the child she used to be. I don't know how to be seen like this, she whispered. I do, I said. You tell the truth. She hung up without responding. The next day, a woman brought her teenage daughter into the shop. The girl ran her fingers over the fabric with reverence. My mum says you don't lie about what fits, she said. No, I agreed. I don't. That afternoon, Camille sent a message. It was less polite this time. She accused me of opportunism, of rewriting history, of humiliating her family. I deleted it. That night, alone in the apartment above the shop, I watched rain streak down the window and felt the quiet weight of consequence settle around me. Not regret, out triumph, responsibility, for the story, for myself, for the cost of finally being honest. The first snow of the season fell on a Thursday, thin and undecided, the kind that dusted sidewalks without committing to anything. I noticed it through the front window while pinning a sleeve, the flakes dissolving as soon as they touched the glass. Lena stood across the street for nearly 20 minutes before she came in. I knew it was her before I looked up. There was a particular stillness to the way she waited, a posture I recognized from a lifetime of watching her brace herself before difficult conversations. She wore the black wool coat I'd given her 2 winters ago, the one she'd loved because it went with everything and never drew attention. It fit her perfectly. It always had. Mia caught my glance and followed it to the window. Is that... Yes. Do you want me to... No, I said. Stay. Lena pushed the door open carefully, as if unsure whether it would resist her. The bell chimed soft and bright, announcing her arrival to a room that no longer belonged to just me. She took in the space slowly. The long work table scarred by scissors and chalk, the racks of half-finished garments, the framed photograph of Ruth laughing in her dress hung where the light hit it just right. "Mom," she said. "Lena." She stepped closer, then stopped, as if realizing she didn't know where she was allowed to stand. "It looks... real." "It is." Nia offered her a polite nod and returned to labeling fabric. The quiet presence felt deliberate, protective without being hostile. "I read the article," Lena said. "I assumed." She swallowed. "They're making a documentary." "Yes. You didn't tell me. I wasn't sure yet." She let out a shaky breath. "They called me." I set my pins down. "And?" "They want me to talk about you," she said. "About us. About the dress." I waited. "I told them no," she added quickly. "At least, I said not yet." "Why?" "Because I don't know what you want me to say," she said, frustration edging her voice. "I don't know what version of me you're telling the world." I turned to face her fully. "I'm telling the truth." "That's not an answer," she snapped. "It's the only one I have." Silence spread between us, thick and brittle. Outside, the snow committed at last, flakes layering the street in quiet agreement. "I didn't come here to fight," Lena said finally. "I came to understand where I stand." I considered the question she hadn't quite asked. "You stand where you always have," I said, "as my daughter. And nothing else?" I felt the ache of that. "I can't build my life around whether you approve of it." Her eyes filled, though she didn't look away. "You used to?" "Yes," I said. "I did." She glanced around again, this time more carefully. "Camille thinks you're punishing us." "I'm not punishing anyone," I said. "I stopped protecting lies. That dress." She began, then stopped. "What about it?" Her voice dropped. "I didn't understand what it cost you." I nodded. "I know." "And now?" I looked at the rack where Celia's suit waited, strong lines and unapologetic shoulders. At the jacket or the form meant for a woman who'd lost one breast and none of her authority. "Now I understand what it costs me not to be honest." Lena pressed her lips together. "I don't know how to make this right." I softened. "I'm not asking you to," she frowned. "Then what do you want from me?" I chose my words carefully. Respect. Gratitude. Apology theatre. Respect. She nodded slowly, as if committing it to memory. "And if I can't?" "Then this," I said gently, gesturing to the space between us, "is what we have." She absorbed that without protest, which told me more than any argument could have. "I don't hate you," she said. "I know, I'm afraid," she admitted, "that if I let go of control, I won't know who I am." I thought of my years in the classroom, of identity built on service until it became a cage. "You'll find out," I said, "eventually." Nia cleared her throat softly, a reminder that the world hadn't paused for our reckoning. "I'll be in the back," she said, and disappeared behind the curtain. Lena looked at me then, truly looked. "You're not coming back, are you?" I smiled, small but certain. "I never left." She nodded, tears finally spill. "Goodbye, Mum. Goodbye, Lena." She hesitated, then added quietly, "Goodbye, May." The door closed behind her with a soft chime. I stood very still, listening to the snow hush the street, feeling the shape of the boundary settle into place. It wasn't a wall, it was a line, clear, necessary. When Nia returned, she didn't ask questions. She handed me a cup of tea and squeezed my shoulder once. "You okay?" she asked. "I'm whole," I said. Outside, the city moved on, indifferent and alive. Inside, surrounded by work that mattered and truth that cost something, I understood that love without respect was only another word for erasure. And I was done disappearing. The quiet that followed Lena's visit felt earned. Not empty, not lonely, settled. Snow continued through the night, a soft insistence that blurred edges and muted sound. By morning, the street outside the studio lay transformed, clean and unassuming, as if nothing sharp had ever passed through it. I opened the shop late. There was no urgency, no appointments until afternoon. I brewed coffee upstairs and drank it slowly by the window, watching a woman walk her dog through the new snow, her boots leaving a careful trail behind her. Each step deliberate, each one hers. The documentary crew arrived just after noon, smaller than I'd imagined. 2 people, a camera, a boom mic that kept drifting into the frame. They asked to film me working, not posing. Stitching, pressing, measuring. I agreed. "Is there anything you don't want us to cover?" the director asked. "Yes," I said. "Anything that turns this into a redemption story." She smiled, thoughtful. "Noted." They filmed my hands more than my face. I liked that. The way thread disappeared into fabric, the way seams became structure, the way patience looked like competence when viewed up close. In the afternoon, a client arrived for a fitting she'd booked months ago, before the articles, before the attention. She was 73 and wanted a dress for her granddaughter's wedding. Something blue, she said, not navy, not apologetic. We laughed together as I adjusted the hem. She told me stories about raising 4 children and losing her husband too young and learning to like her own company. I told her about silk weights and balance. When she left, she hugged me. "Thank you for not rushing me," she said. That evening, after the crew packed up and the streetlights flickered on, I pulled a garment bag from the back closet. Inside was the dress I'd made for Lena. It had been months since I'd touched it. I laid it out on the work table, smoothing the silk, checking the seams. Time had softened nothing. It was still what it had always been, careful, complete. I didn't cry. Instead, I reached for my shears. The first cut was clean, deliberate. I shortened the skirt, opened the neckline, changed the proportions. The dress shifted under my hands, not diminished, but transformed. By midnight, it was something else entirely. In the mirror, I barely recognized myself. The dress fit, not as a bride, as a woman. I stood there for a long moment, barefoot on the studio floor, silk brushing my ankles, and felt something settle deep in my chest. Not pride, not triumph, belonging. The next morning, the documentary director texted to say the working title had been approved. Threadwork. I didn't respond right away. I had an appointment. When I unlocked the door, the snow had begun to melt, water tracing new paths along the curb. Inside, the shop smelled faintly of steam and fabric and coffee, layers of a life being lived forward. I pinned a small card near the fitting rooms that read, "This work is allowed to change." Below it, in smaller letters, "So am I." Later that afternoon, a woman walked in carrying a garment bag of her own. She looked nervous, hopeful, familiar. "I heard you don't make compromises," she said. "I make choices," I replied. She smiled, relieved. As the door closed behind her, the bell chimed softly, the sound threading into the steady rhythm of my days. Somewhere across the city, my daughter was building a life that no longer required my permission. And here, in this light-filled room shaped by my hands, I was building one that no longer required hers. I took my place at the table, threaded my needle, and began again. Night from loss, from intention.